Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your curiosity, feed it a stack of sources, and bring you back the distilled essential knowledge.
It's good to be back.
Today, we are strapping in for a very targeted mission. It's one that really cuts across almost every professional discipline you can think of. But our sources today, they examine it through the specific lens of creative writing.
Right. And this is interesting because we're not talking about what makes a great story.
Yeah.
We're talking about something more fundamental. It's how a great story, or really any complex project, actually gets made in the first place.
That's absolutely right. And we have a fascinatingly focused set of materials here. It's essentially an argument for validating different ways of working.
Diverse processes, yeah. It really gets to the heart of a choice that every creator, every manager, every, problem solver has to face.
Structure versus intuition.
Exact. Structure versus intuition. So the core mission for us today is to extract that definitive insight that helps you understand that there really is no single correct way to build something great.
And I think this dive is so relevant because it speaks directly to you, the learner. You might be feeling this internal pressure, or maybe it's external judgment, that your process, the way you actually get the work done is somehow flawed.
Just because it doesn't look like the textbook example.
Exactly, because it doesn't match that traditional, highly structured methodology. So today, we are going deep into this duality that our research defines as plotting versus pants.
The creative spectrum. I like that term. It's an immediate validation of that process diversity we mentioned, and it argues that highly effective creative production can be on either end of that spectrum.
And we'll be using specific examples from the writing world to make a universal point about discipline and outcome.
Yeah, and that includes the work of a creator named Jenna Moreci.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the real meat of the discussion, the discipline required for both approaches, we should probably integrate that name our sources use. She sort of frames the plotting side of this dynamic. The sources introduce the creator, Jenna Moreci.
And this is a perfect example of why getting the details right really matters. The materials, they were very helpful. They gave us a clarification on her name.
Oh, good.
It's pronounced Moreci.
Moreci. Okay, got it.
And she's the anchor we need, really, for the structural side of this conversation.
So by anchoring the discussion to her specific preference for plotting, for that detailed structural outlining, the research immediately sets up this clear, successful standard.
Yeah.
And against that, the contrasting intuitive approach can be, validated.
That's a great way to put it. We aren't treating the planner as the default correct way.
No, we're just treating them as one powerful example of a viable process.
Precisely. We need that clear baseline, a recognized successful practitioner who favors that heavy, visible planning. It makes the whole argument stronger. Well, the structure of the source material then pivots from that baseline, turns and argues, and really forces that the opposite of the intuitive one holds equal.
And crucially, equal professional discipline.
And that's equal discipline. This whole setup allows for a truly equitable discussion about about process.
Okay, so let's jump right into defining these two poles of the creative spectrum. And I think we should start with the one that gets the most skepticism, especially in conversations about, professional rigor.
Pantsing.
Pantsing. It's still a funny word. I mean, it's literally writing by the seat of your pants.
That's exactly where it comes from.
Yeah.
And our research defines it as a process where the writer discovers their stories by writing them.
So they step onto the blank page without a complete roadmap.
Pretty much. The structure is built iteratively. It's organic. It happens moment by moment. It is, by its very definition, the absolute antithesis of a rigid-tailed plan.
Now, I have to admit, to someone who's not familiar with this, that sounds terrifying.
It does.
It just sounds chaotic,
Yeah.
like a perfect recipe for a structural disaster.
And that's the immediate reaction most people have. But the source gives a very clear, very powerful analogy that completely reframes.
Okay.
It compares pantsing to improvisation in music or theater.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Right. That analogy is the key to validating the entire process. It moves the discussion immediately away from a perceived lack of preparation.
Which is the common dismissive label. Oh, you just didn't want to do the hard work of outlining.
Exactly. And it moves it into a discussion of a highly skilled, real-time application of expertise.
So like a brilliant stand-up comedian doing crowd work.
Perfect example. They don't have a script for that specific conversation with someone in the front row, but they are relying on this huge internalized knowledge of comedic structure, of pacing, of timing, of callbacks.
Or, to use the music example, a top-tier jazz ensemble. They're not just performing from sheet music. They're improvising on a theme.
Yeah.
But that improvisation isn't just random noise. It can't be.
No, it's built upon years, decades of deeply ingrained knowledge. music theory, scales, harmonic progression, and this immediate intuitive rapport with the other musicians on stage.
This structure is absolutely present in that jazz solo. It's just not externalized on a sheet of paper.
It's internalized in the artist.
Right.
And that internalization is the critical component of the pantsers discipline. A pantser doesn't lack structure. They just possess the structure in a way that lets them apply it reactively without all the pre-planning.
So what does that internal repertoire, as you called it, look like for a writer?
Well, it includes all the literary rules, the 3-act structure, foreshadowing, character consistency, thematic development, all of it. So when a character makes an unexpected choice in, say, chapter 5,
the pantser is immediately processing the implications of that choice against that internalized map of narrative theory.
Instantly. They're thinking, okay, if she does this now, what does that mean for the ending I was vaguely thinking of? How does this change her relationship with that other character? It's all happening on the fly.
I can see how that demands, just total intellectual immersion.
It does.
You have to maintain this continuous high-level recall. You can't just stop every few minutes and worry, wait, does this choice contradict something I wrote 3 months ago?
You can't. You have to trust your internal narrative engine, and you have to maintain flow. It's what psychologists call that deep state of flow.
Where you lose track of time.
Exactly. The psychological reward for the pantser is this state of pure discovery. It's incredibly exhilarating.
That's a good way to frame it. If plotting is like a high-speed train ride on tracks that are already laid, then pantsing is like exploring a new territory in a rugged, specialized vehicle. You're encountering the story for the first time, right alongside your reader.
And that immediate discovery can fuel immense energy and creativity. But, and this is important, the psychological cost is also higher.
The cost being that constant low-level anxiety that the spontaneous discovery will eventually lead you right off a structural cliff.
Precisely. The pantser has to embrace the idea that the first draft will be messy. They have to see it as the story's raw DNA and accept that the real, sometimes brutal, work comes later in the edit.
So the process is the discovery mechanism.
That's it. And when that process is successful, the source material validates. This reliance on intuition isn't a lesser form of discipline. It's just a demanding, different application. It's a reactive one rather than a proactive.
Okay, so that's the improvisational high-wire active pant. Now let's define the structural alternative, plotting. This is based on the contrasting definition implied by our sources.
Right. We're talking about working from rigid plans, from detailed outlining, and from structural maps that are all created before the initial draft begins.
Plotting provides the safety and the control.
It does. For the successful plotter, the act of writing the prose, of actually putting sentences together, is the final stage of problem solving. It's not the first.
Because they've already addressed all the major structural issues, the character motivations, the thematic beats, all the logistical hurdles.
Oh, and the outlining phase.
So we're talking about methodologies like the snowflake method, which builds the story structure outwards from a single sentence.
Or using beat sheets.
Like the ones from Save the Cat, where every major plot point is accounted for and timed before you even write chapter 1.
Absolutely. The plotter often generates documents that are in and of themselves creative work. You'll see these incredibly detailed chapter summaries, character biographies that are pages long, world-building encyclopedias.
So for the plotter, the outlining phase is the primally creative discovery phase.
That's where the puzzle solving happens. It's efficient, it's logical, it's structured.
And this is where we bring back our example, Moreci. Our sources point her out as a prime example of a creator who prefers plotting.
Right. And you can see it in her output. It's structured, it's intentional, and we can infer highly efficient because those crucial, time-consuming creative decisions have already been made. They're documented.
So the prose writing becomes more of an execution, like a translation from a known blueprint into a final polished art.
That's the critical distinction, I think. It's a massive upfront cognitive commitment, but in theory, it saves immense time and prevents those crippling structural issues down the line.
You don't get 60,000 words into a draft and realize your main character's motivation makes no sense.
Exactly. It minimizes the risk of that kind of catastrophic structural failure mid-draft. It's a managerial, almost risk-averse approach to creativity, and that really appeals to people who need that organization to maintain focus.
But, and this is the classic question, doesn't that risk creating a story that feels a bit sterile? If the author knows every twist and turn and every line of dialogue is just serving some predefined structural beat, where is the room for genuine surprise, for organic growth?
That's a very valid challenge, and it's the primary critique that pantsers often level at plotter.
Your story feels like it was written by a robot.
Something like that, yeah. And the source material addresses this by using her preference not as an endorsement of superiority, but as a comparative tool, just a different way.
So one isn't better, they're just different trade-offs.
Exact. Plotting is efficient and reliable. but it trades that immediate emotional discovery for structural. Pantsing trades structural control for immediate emotional discovery. The discussion is trying to show that both methods have inherent strengths and, inherent risks.
And that leads us perfectly into the core defense of pantsing, countering the misconceptions and establishing its own unique form of professional discipline.
Right, and this is where the source material gets very assertive. It's directly addressing the implied criticism that often comes from plotting advocates and more traditional structures.
So if plotting is viewed as professional and controlled, we establish the dismissive labels sometimes applied to pantsing.
Chaotic.
Lazy.
Unprofessional.
These labels imply that the pantser just doesn't care about the outcome enough to plan.
And that perception is deeply rooted in what you could call tradition bias.
What do you mean by that?
Well, many organizational structures, whether they involve writing a book or managing logistics for a company, they inherently favor processes that are visible, quantifiable, repeatable.
A chart, a detailed outline. These are things you can show your boss. They're a kind of managerial comfort blanket.
Exactly. And an intuitive process which resists that kind of visibility and is often dismissed because the intellectual rigor is all happening internally, hidden from.
So the source material is essentially clarifying that we shouldn't judge the quality of the intellectual effort based purely on the visibility of the planning document. The effort is just being applied in a different phase of the project.
Precise. The source is arguing strongly for process neutrality and judgment, which is an essential clarification for anyone who feels that, that guilt about their intuitive process.
And it states directly, pantsing is not chaotic, not lazy, and not unprofessional.
It's a highly skilled, high-stakes application of narrative knowledge. And that brings us to maybe the most vital assertion in the material.
Let's hear it.
That the intuitive process can be just as effective and just as disciplined as detailed outlining.
Okay, let's really deep dive into that. The concept of discipline in pantsing. Because that feels, on the surface, very counterintuitive. If I'm just making it up as I go, where's the rigor?
The rigor is in the aftermath and in the real-time adaptation.
Okay, break that down.
When a plotter finishes a draft, their discipline was primarily structural, right? They were ensuring the execution matched the blueprint. When a pantser finishes a draft, the real work is often just beginning. Their discipline has to focus heavily on what you could call structural triage and refinement.
So what does that actually look like? Practically speaking, what are the discipline steps a pantser has to take that a plotter can sometimes skip?
Well, the most famous tool in the pantser's toolkit is the reverse outline.
A reverse out. So you write the book first and then you outline it.
Exactly. The pantser's first draft is a raw exploration. Our source material compares it to a slab of marble. It has the shape of the statue inside, but it's rough.
So they then have to go back, and I imagine this is sometimes painful, and create an outline from the existing text.
Yes. And this requires intense intellectual rigor. You have to identify the true structural path that emerged organic chaos and then, and this is the hard part, ruthlessly excise the dead ends and the contradictions.
So they're essentially plotting in reverse. They're disciplined enough to confront the mess they made and force it into coherence.
That sounds like a much harder discipline than simply following a map you already drew.
It really does.
It is the discipline of post facto structural repair. It demands instant, high-level recall and an immediate commitment to the emerging narrative structure.
What do you mean by that, commitment to the emerging structure?
I mean, if you realize that something in Chapter 15 requires a major change to Chapter 2, let's say you need to introduce a key object or a character much later.
Right.
A disciplined pantser faces that revision head-on. They know that the discovery process means the subsequent editing process will be far more intensive and potentially painful.
So the discipline is focused on revision, on refinement, and often on the brutal act of killing your darling.
That's it. Cutting beautifully written passages that were fun to discover, but that ultimately served no structural purpose in the final.
That makes perfect sense now. The discipline isn't about avoiding the mess. It's about being skilled and committed enough to manage the high-stakes chaos that you created intuitively.
Yes, it fundamentally shifts the primary focus from planning to editing.
Let me use your analogy again, the construction metaphor, because I think it illustrates the trade-off so well.
Please elaborate on it further.
Okay, so you have the plotting team. They're working from these incredibly detailed blueprints. Every beam, every wire, every nail is specified.
A very rigid plan.
Right. And if the blueprint is flawless, the build should be flawed. But here's the catch. If they find an unexpected geological feature when they start digging the foundation, a giant boulder they didn't know was there,
the entire plan grinds to a halt.
Exactly. That's the rigidity problem. The initial investment in planning is massive, the execution risk is low, until the structure fails because of an unforeseen variable.
Okay, so what about the panther?
The panther is the team building modularly with strict quality control. Or maybe a better analogy is they're building a bridge across a foggy canyon.
I like that.
They know the starting point and they know the rough destination on the other side, but they don't have the engineering specs for every single segment until they actually get there.
So they're relying on immediate problem solving.
Constant, using superior skill and material knowledge to ensure that every modular unit they build connects seamlessly and with strict quality control to the previous one, even if they didn't anticipate the exact angle of the junction beforehand.
So the discipline isn't in the blueprint, it's in the immediate, impeccable quality of...
Yes, the pantser is performing that quality control check in real time or immediately afterward. They are constantly asking themselves, does this choice violate the internal logic that I established 2 chapters ago?
And that level of intuitive coherence is a discipline that is so often undervalued because, as we said, it's internal and it's invisible to an outside manager.
And that's what the source material is valid. This intuitive process isn't just discipline, it's powerful.
Yes, and the research really focuses on the emotional payoff here, stating that many powerful, emotionally resonant stories are born from intuition rather than from those rigid plans.
Okay, why is that connection so strong between intuition and emotional power?
It connects back to the element of surprise.
The writer's surprise.
The writer's surprise, yes. When a writer is genuinely discovering the story as they write it, when they themselves are surprised by a plot or deeply moved by a character's unexpected sacrifice.
That rawness, that unfiltered emotional intensity, it transfers directly to the page.
It has to. They are not merely executing a scene they planned 6 months ago in a spreadsheet. They are reacting to an emerging tragedy or a triumph in real time. That shock and that fresh energy, palpable.
I can absolutely relate to that as a reader.
Yeah.
When you read something that feels so vital and completely unexpected, you get the sense that the author must have been leaning into that risk themselves. Plotting, while it's safe, can sometimes risk producing stories that feel a little mechanical or predictable because the author already knew the destination from page 1.
Whereas intuition forces the writer to trust those unexpected turns. And this often leads to deeper characterizations and a more authentic voice because the characters themselves were allowed to...
It's like the characters took over the story.
Exactly. And the source material is essentially giving permission for that wild, flourishing forest approach. It's assuring the listener that it is a valid, high-skill endeavor.
It's a necessary counterbalance to the perceived professionalism of the detailed outline.
It is. A rigid plan can sometimes stifle the very unexpected, profound moments that define truly great.
And that structural validation, it brings us to the ultimate metric for creative success, doesn't it? The final output.
Yes, the source material is adamant that we have to look beyond the process entirely and judge only the output.
We need to highlight the source's definitive statement here. It feels like the core message of tolerance and validation for this whole deep dive.
I agree. It's that writing differently from someone else does not make the work lesser.
The method of creation is irrelevant to the quality of the final product.
It's so simple and so powerful.
And this extends so far beyond writing. This is a general principle for you, the learner, regardless of whether you're crafting a marketing strategy or developing a scientific hypothesis.
The functionality of a process determined by the individual and the successful outcome, not by external standards or peer pressure to adopt some fashion method.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Please.
Think about software development. It's a highly disciplined field. You have teams that follow this strict waterfall methodology.
That's the plotting analog, right?
Absolutely. Detailed planning, sequential phases, sign-offs at every single step. Very rigid. And then you have highly agile or scrum teams that rely on iterative development.
Pantsing analog.
Exactly. Quick pivots, continuous discovery during the build process. It can look messy from the outside.
And very often, organizations spend more time and energy debating which methodology to use than they do on actually evaluating the quality of the final product that was delivered.
That is so true.
The source material forces us to prioritize efficacy over the aesthetics of organization. The agile team might look chaotic to a waterfall manager, but if that agile team delivers high-quality functional code that meets the user's needs fast,
then their intuitive, iterative process is demonstrably superior for them.
For that project, for that team, yes. The messiness of the creative or the production process is totally irrelevant if the outcome is clean and compelling and it works.
So let's zero in on that ultimate judgment point established by the source. If the process is irrelevant, what matters?
The source states it very plainly. What matters is whether the story works, not how the writer got there.
And that is the single, brutal, and I think very fair standard for success.
It is. The writer who meticulously plotted every single, and the writer who discovered the entire plot in the final draft are judged on the exact same criteria.
Did they create a cohesive, resonant, and compelling piece of work? That's it.
But defining what works means in this context is crucial, isn't it?
It is. It's not just about selling copies. although that can be part of it. The source implies it means effectiveness, resonance, and fundamentally completion.
Right. An outline that never turns into a book, no matter how brilliant it is, doesn't work.
And an intuitive draft that falls apart halfway through and gets abandoned, that also doesn't.
And this is where that discipline argument we had comes.
I'll say.
If a pantser succeeds in wrestling their chaotic, discovered first draft into a structurally sound, emotionally impactful final manuscript, then that success inherently validates the method.
The success overrides the perceived difficulty or the lack of structure in their initial approach.
Precisely. And conversely, a perfect, elegant outline that results in dull, lifeless prose also fails the metric. It doesn't work.
It's a powerful validation of results over methodology. We spend so much time debating the prep work, the outlines, the process charts. But the reader or the consumer or the end user, they only interact with the finished product. They don't see the outline or the lack of one.
They just experience the result.
And that separation is critical. The creative process is private. The finished art is public.
And the source material is strongly advocating that the public sphere, critical reception, functional quality, should only judge the public output. It shouldn't impose arbitrary standards on the private process of creation.
This leads directly to the source's call for tolerance and for understanding within the creative community. It really feels like a plea for acceptance.
It is. It's recognizing that there is intense tribalism, even among people who are ostensibly doing the same thing.
Plotters sometimes view cancers as reckless amateurs.
And pantsers sometimes view plotters as stifled or, robotic functionaries who are just connecting the dots.
And the source expresses this hope that advocates for one method will eventually understand that there is no single correct way to write.
Because what works for one person's cognitive style will be absolutely cryptic.
That's the key, isn't it? It's about cognitive style.
It has to be.
For some people, the anxiety of the blank page is just too much, and it's mitigated by structure. That's plotting. The planner needs that safety net of knowing the path ahead.
But for others, the anxiety of a constrained map, of being locked into a plan, is mitigated by freedom. That's pantsing. The improviser needs room to breathe and to pivot.
So they're both just coping mechanisms that lead to create.
That's a great way to look at it. And the critical takeaway for all is simple. Process heterogeneity, having different ways of doing things, is not a sign of weakness. In any field that requires complex creation, it's a sign of strength and adaptation.
Pantsing deserves the same respect as plot.
Absolutely. If you can achieve a successful outcome, you have demonstrated discipline. It might have been the discipline of post facto structural repair rather than preemptive planning, but it's discipline nonetheless.
So let's try to synthesize these core learning points. We've established that pantsing is a valid, disciplined method, a lot like improvisation.
Right. It requires intense real-time commitment to consistency and a high tolerance for structural revision.
And the perceived laziness is a misconception. It stems from an external inability to observe the internal rigor that's going on.
And most importantly, creative and professional success defined solely by the outcome, whether the result is effective and functional, not by the structural approach used to get.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? This dive wasn't just about typing words into a doc. This is permission.
Permission to do what?
Permission to trust your internal process, regardless of whether you're planning a meeting or drafting a policy document, or, yes, writing a novel.
The discipline required for your work, it just might not be visible in an organizational chart or a detailed agenda that you show.
Exactly. It's an encouragement to move beyond process shame, whether you're doing it to yourself, because I think a lot of us do.
Well, for sure.
Or you're doing it to others. If your output is high quality and effective, you have demonstrated skill and discipline. We just so often confuse the appearance of organization with genuine effectiveness.
That's a powerful distinction.
And that brings us to our final thought for you to chew on after this deep dive. If the only metric that truly matters is whether the output works, we have to apply that to the truly logistical field. So how does one practically define work for a project that doesn't involve traditional storytelling, say designing a new organizational structure or optimizing a supply chain?
That's a tough one. And we also have to consider the cost of each method, don't we? If we accept that a messy, intuitive process, a pantsing approach, can lead to a great result, but it requires a far more expensive, time-consuming cleanup effort later, is that still always preferable?
That's a great question. And conversely, how does recognizing this plotting versus pantsing duality change how we evaluate success and failure in those non-creative, more logistical fields? I mean, if a perfectly planned supply chain fails spectacularly due to one unexpected market shift, was the flawless plotting truly the most disciplined approach? Or was it just rigid?
Something to think about the next time you draft that email, build that spreadsheet, or start that next big thing.
Trust the process that delivers the result. Until next time, keep digging deep.